the result of Lashon Hara is this living in your own little bubble. And Gullus really is that idea that we're not living in the reality. Right? We're living in the world of Dimyan, of different Gullus. So, Lashon Hara is, so let's go back. Man bar sama d'chayim. Who wants the illness of life? And he said, the Shalosh Shamara, and Rabbi goes, oh, that's amazing, I never thought. Man bar sama d'chayim. So, Rabbi knew the pasuk. Ni ha-chafetz chayim. But you know what the chayim meant? He thought chayim meant the world to come. If you want to acquire your world to come, don't speak Lashon Hara. Don't destroy your world. He didn't realize the pasuk saying something else. If you want to live in this world, in reality, and not in the bubble, don't speak Lashon Hara. That's what he didn't realize. He always thought, Chafetz Chaim means you want a life, you want spiritual life, then don't speak Lashon Hara, because you're killing yourself spiritually. Okay, I get that. So I understand, Chafetz Chaim, if I want life in the eternal world, I can't speak Lashon Hara. But what he brought to light was, no, we're not just in that world, that's true. But you're not living in this world when you're speaking Lashon Hara. You're living in a world of illusion and delusion. You're thinking that you're right? So you want to asama d'chaim in this world. If you want the elixir of life for this world, then watch what you say. Be careful what you say. Don't live in a world of dimyan and think that everyone's taking something away from you. So that was the chiddush to Rabbi Yanai, that not speaking Lashon Hara is not just to help you acquire the world to come and eternity. It's helping you to live in a world of reality, in this world. That's what it is. Otherwise, when you speak Lashon Hara, it's always a dimyan that you got to bring this guy down because you think he's taking something from you. That's the world of Lashon Hara, and that's the lesson that Rabbi Yanai learned. Just by the way, there's this story, I think I mentioned that when it says this peddler went around from place to place, and he went to Tzipori. It's interesting that he's a peddler. A peddler is called a rochel. That's a peddler, but rochel also means vechilus, speaking Lashon Hara. So Tzaddik learns that actually that this peddler, in a previous life, or literally in a Gilgul, or in the previous part of his life, he was a big Baal Lashon Hara. He spoke Lashon Hara. So there's a double and done, and therefore he felt his life's mission, his tikkun had to be, right? And he went to a place called Tzipori. Tzipor is a bird, because that's what the Baal Lashon Hara brings. He brings a bird to remind himself, chirp, 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 right? You're busy yapping. So this Reichel was a Reichel himself. He was a peddler, but in a different life he was a Rochel, a Baal Lashon Hara, and he felt his tikkun had to be to teach the world. That's not the case. So really, it's a beautiful.
Rabbi, which siman corresponds to which galut?
Sorry?
Which one of the four? Each one corresponds to what galut?
I don't have it in front of me, but I have the medrash. I can show it to you later on. Medrash goes through this one. All right. So that's the idea behind the. One more thing I'll mention is the. We'll stop here. In Tazriah, we talk about Ishikas Rebbe the Zachar, and talks about the famous idea that in the mother's womb, the Medrash tells us the Malach teaches the child Torah. Right? We know that, and then before you leave, taps you over here. What's interesting, there's another part of that medrash that often is not quoted. And that is that when a person leaves this world, you know the first person that greets him in Shemayim? Is that Malach that tapped him over here. Because that Malach says, one second, I was the one that taught you all that Torah. Let's see what you came back with. Right? So it's kind of a full circle, so to speak. The very Malach that taught us all that Torah, he's the one that's going to challenge us in Shemayim. So I taught you all that stuff. What are you bringing back with you? What are you bringing back with you or not? So we have to realize that, we've given all this tremendous potential, and there's an accountability in terms of, what we did retain, what we did bring back, what we did make real in our lives. Also, just one thing, we know that when a woman gives birth, she becomes tameh, becomes impure, which is a hard thing to understand. Childbirth should be considered to be such a special thing. Why would it be something that would bring tumah? And again, I think Reb Tzadok explains this, that just like in physics, nature abhors a vacuum. I shouldn't say just like. Hashem created physics to give us a window into the spiritual world. Just like nature abhors a vacuum, tumah, impurity, abhors a vacuum. Which means whenever there's purity, there's purity. But if purity leaves a space, tumah comes in. That's why when a person dies and the neshama leaves, his body becomes tameh. Because the purity leaves, impurity sets in. Because impurity abhors a vacuum, so to speak, as well. And when a woman, before she gives birth, we know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is present. Right? It says, Shleisha Shuttim Badim, there are three partners in the creation of the human being. Hashem is present, and at childbirth, so to speak, that presence of Hashem is gone. So now Tum has set in, because there's a higher level of purity, and that impurity sets in. That's really where it comes from. But that, again, is the same idea that, and by the way, that idea that impurity sets in when there was purity is not just in a very abstract, esoteric sense. It's also in a very practical sense. A person is occupied doing positive things, stays positive. But once a person stops doing something positive, there are many Mishnayos and Avos and other places that when a person doesn't do positive things with his life, then negative things happen in his life. Right? It says boredom is the root of all evil, right? But that's really a psukim in the Mishnayos that talk about that. In Pirkei Avos and other places, that if we're not occupied with doing positive things, then we'll end up being occupied doing negative things. And so the practical application of nature or tumah boards of vacuum is that in our own lives as well. But that's the lesson behind the woman that becomes impure is based on that. So you have Isha Kizriya V'Yelda Zachar, and the pasuk goes on to discuss the tumah that's involved, and then it goes. We mentioned the idea of next parsha talks about the Mitzayra and the lashon hara that brings about to saras. So I want to mention that the chinuch, and this is parsha, talks very fascinatingly about. We believe in something called hashgacha pratis. We believe that everything has a very direct intervention by Kadosh Baruch Hu. And where do you see that concept in the Torah? So the chinuch says, you see it in this week's parsha. Saras is the ultimate example of hashgacha pratis. When the chinuch wants to talk about, the chinuch was, we know he codified all the mitzvahs based on tamei mitzvahs. He was the one that introduced reasons for mitzvahs. And he said, Saras teaches us the concept of hashgacha pratis. If you speak lashon hara, you get saras. There's no scientific explanation. It clearly has to be hashgacha pratis. So this parsha, this mitzvah, saras, is where the chinuch discusses the very concept of hashgacha pratis. And then he asks a really interesting question. He debates, how far do you go with hashgacha pratis? When a leaf falls off a tree, is that part of hashgacha pratis? Or they're just part of nature? Meaning Hashem created nature, but then, as the expression goes, nature takes its course. So is it pshat that Hashem created nature and now nature takes its course? Or is it that, no, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wills that leaf off a tree? That's what he actually kind of questions in terms of how far you go to hashgacha pratis. So he concludes that the leaf falling off a tree is part of Teva, part of nature. Now that's hard to understand because there are many midrashim. One of the famous midrashim is that there's not a single blade of grass that doesn't grow until Hashem instructs a malach to hit that blade of grass to say grow. So that means HaKadosh Baruch Hu is involved with every single blade of grass, right? So what does it mean that the chinuch says that no, the leaf falls off the tree, it's nature taking its course? And I think the really important insight is the following. There's no debate. And the Baal Shem, by the way, talked about all that. Baal Shem talked about all the time. He saw a leaf falling off a tree and with a worm, and he said it had to happen. There's no really dispute over here. Everything is hashgacha pratis. There's nothing that happens outside of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's purview. Everything. The only difference is Hashem set up a world that doesn't, like a world of nature, and then Hashem also created a world where He intervenes. Meaning that even though everything is willed by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there's no question about that. But in terms of ourselves, how do we perceive it in terms of, do we learn a lesson from it or not? If I see a leaf fall down from a tree, I say, oh, there's a lesson. Why did I see that leaf fall from a tree? It must be, right, a lesson for me. Really, we have no right to learn a lesson from something that appears to be something quite natural. That's what it means. Of course, there is a reason for it. I mean, there's hashgacha for it, and there's a reason. But we're not required to know, or should we be able to figure out what the reason is. But when something happens in our lives that's a little bit out of the ordinary, or something unusual, then of course we're mechuyev to try to figure out what's Hashem trying to tell me.
That's how Isaac Newton discovered gravity, sitting and atom falling down on his head.
Right. Okay. So there's nothing outside of hashgacha Hashem. That's clear. It just means, are we learning from it or not? Do we have a achrayus to learn? Do we have a responsibility to learn from that ma'isa? Are we supposed to inspect it or not? That when it comes to nature, we shouldn't start reading into things that we don't necessarily know. Um, and that idea, obviously, is an important thing that in general in our lives, we have to try to find hashgacha in our lives and appreciate that everything happens for a reason. The Baal Shem Tov, when he first introduced Hasidus to the world, so one of the things he emphasized was hashgacha pratis. And the reason for that is you have to, again, know the backdrop of Baal Shem. We know that the Jews at that time were repressed in every way. Economically, it was horrific for them. Socially, they were not accepted. Educationally, they didn't have an education, a Jewish education, which means they weren't even accepted by some of their Jewish peers who were more educated. And because of such financial hardships, they had to send their kids of 10 years old into work, so they had the barest of education. So they were pogroms, so they were psychologically crushed, they were spiritually crushed, they were socially crushed, in every which way. And Baal Shem saw as a vote to try to rehabilitate a nation that was devastated on so many levels. And one of the things he did to do that was emphasize that HaKadosh Baruch Hu never abandons us. That is always, no matter what, there's HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the world sending us messages all the time. And he emphasized that all the time. Hashgacha pratis. One of his Talmidim was Yaakov Yosef in Polania, known as the Toldos Yaakov Yosef, and he actually wrote most of the Baal Shem's Torah that we have today. Now, like all of Baal Shem's original Hasidim, none of them were raised Hasidim. They were all raised, in a Misnagid world, and he had to win them over. Yaakov Yosef was one of the people that was totally enamored by the Baal Shem's brilliance and his warmth and his incredible insight, but yet remained somewhat skeptical, especially about the Baal Shem's emphasis on Hashgacha pratis. He felt that Baal Shem's emphasis was way too extreme. One day he and the Baal Shem were learning some Torah, and we talk about this maybe? I don't remember. And a repairman stuck his head in the doorway and said to the Baal Shem, do you have anything to repair? And Baal Shem said, there's nothing to repair now. And the repairman said, there's always something to repair. To which the Baal Shem took as a private message. He said, you see, Hashem is telling us there's always something to repair in our lives. And Yaakov said that was a little bit extreme. And he jumped out of his seat and said, I can't believe that. And he walked out. And as he walked out, the Baal Shem said to him, you could believe it, you just don't want to believe it. And as he walked out into the street, stormed down the street, was a fellow guy with a wagon driver that was lifting up bales of hay to put on this wagon, and he needed some help because it was heavy, the bales. And he saw Yaakov walking and said, could you help me with these bales of hay? And Yaakov was very upset and said, I can't help you now. He said, yes you can, you just don't want. And when he heard the exact same words, he made this U-turn right back, and he realized that everything is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Baal Shem was known to always try to see Hashgacha and everything. In fact, he once saw Chilul Shabbos, and it was so painful. He said, why is Hashem punishing me? Like, Chilul Shabbos was painful. I had a roommate, actually Yerushalmi, who was 8th generation Yerushalmi. Now it's 2 generations past that, because that was many years ago, by 10. But he was 8th generation Yerushalmi. He told me his great-grandfather, the first time he saw Chilul Shabbos, he saw somebody driving a car, he fainted. Like, he just couldn't, what? It can't be. He just never saw such a thing, couldn't imagine any Jew, Michal Shabbos. He fainted. Today, unfortunately, we're too used to it already. But he fainted. Anyway, so when the Baal Shem saw Chil Shabbos, he felt there was something, why is Hashem letting me see this? It's so painful. And then he realized what he thought about it, he realized what it was. And during the week, we know that a Talmud Chacham was compared to Shabbos. Gemara brings it down. He said during the week, he thought about this whole week, and once during the week, somebody said something disparaging about a Talmud Chacham, and the Baal Shem Tov didn't defend his honor enough. So he said, I was Machal Shabbos, because the Talmud Chacham was compared to Shabbos, I was Machal Shabbos. And that's why Hashem showed me Chil Shabbos, and that's what he did Shuvah. So again, we're not talking about Baal Shem Tov's Madrega, but certainly the idea that we should realize that there's nothing, that every day of our lives is full of Hashgacha, is what the mitzvah of Tzaras is teaching us. So even when it's talking about leprosy and Lashon Hara, the Chinuch emphasizes this is the aside of Hashgacha pratis. This mitzvah is the foundation of the whole concept of Lashon Hara, of Hashgacha pratis, that everything that happens in life, every single thing, there's a reason, there's Hashgacha. Sometimes we can understand it, sometimes we can't. And sometimes we're not mechuyev to try to understand it. But when we can, we should at least appreciate that there's a reason for it. Even if we don't know the reason, but if we know there's Hashgacha, there's a reason. I think I once told you so. I remember this thing. there was, I think I told you this, my son. There was every rabbi has in his kehillah, in his congregation, at least one ludnik. You know what ludnik is? A guy that just drives you nuts. You say day, he says night. It doesn't make a difference. He's just there, and he just gets his jollies out of just driving you crazy. It's got to be like that. Everyone's got one. So this guy would come to shul every Shabbos, and didn't believe in Hashem, and he would just scream at the rabbi, "There's no God." He's fighting every day. He's driving me nuts. Anyway, one week the rabbi there's a pounding on the door at midnight. Pounding at midnight. Doesn't know what it is, and he opens the door, and this guy bursts into the room, and he's like half crying, half screaming, and he's like in a rage. "Rabbi, I don't know why. I wonder why." He said, "What are you talking about?" And it seems that he and his sister had been walking, and she just got hit by a car. I don't know. At the end, I think she was okay, but I don't remember. And he was just totally devastated. And he said, "I want to know why. I want to know why." So Rabbi very calmly said to him, "You have no right to ask me that question." And he was like very taken aback. He said, "Rabbi, I'm in such pain, and you give me such a..." I have no idea. He said, "No, I mean this very seriously. If you don't believe in a God, why are you asking why? Who says there's a reason? The opposite of God, when there's no God, means random. So you can't ask why, because why means there's a reason. Who says there's a reason? If you don't believe in Hashem, there is no reason." That's when he realized that if he's asking why, that must mean that there is a reason. Reason is called hashgacha pratis. But even if we don't know what the reason is, the fact that we know that there is a reason gives some consolation, rather than feeling that everything happened in life is no reason, it's random. So hashgacha pratis reminds us, and that's what the Baal Shem tried to infuse in the Hasidim. Hakadosh Baruch Hu's hashgacha pratis is there all the time, and if you don't quite understand it, but understand it's not random. There's a reason. Maybe we'll find out now. Maybe we'll find out later. We won't find out, but understand it's not random. It's much more painful, right? Much more painful to think something terrible happened for no reason. That's much more painful than say it happened for a reason. I just don't know what it is. But hashgacha pratis reminds us, and that's tzaras. But it's incredible. We don't live in that world anymore. Imagine those days. You spoke Lashon Hara, boom, Hashem remind you. What are you doing? Right? That's tzaras, and we have to at least live with that understanding of hashgacha pratis. Certainly hashgacha klalius, and certainly when you look at Eretz Yisrael, you can certainly see hashgacha pratis. There's so much hashgacha pratis. How Israel came to be. Everyone knows the famous story with Truman and this Jewish fellow who owned a hat store, right? Everyone knows that story. You can't get bigger hashgacha pratis than that, right? If this guy wouldn't have been neighbors with this Jewish guy with a hat store, who knows, right? Hashem plans everything. You have to see hashgacha pratis and everything, and that's the limud of tzaras as well. I will stop here.
Wow, thank you.